Okay, hello, Ryan. Bruce Levey. What exactly did you decide to embark on the journey of making your movie Out of the Ring?
Well, it was interesting with Out in the Ring. It comes from my childhood love of wrestling. I grew up in Alberta on Calgary Stampede Wrestling. Some of those great stars like the Hart family and Brian Pillman. And I kind of went from there. I took that love of wrestling growing up with it. And when it came time to tell a story, I decided to, through a queer lens, tell a story about something that I loved. And at the time that I embarked on this and started just kind of researching in 2015, I hadn't seen a lot of queer representation or heard a lot about queer representation in wrestling. Obviously, you see some of the character representations, the Adrian Streets, the Gorgeous Georges, and Adrian Adonises. And then you heard rumors about people. There were many wrestlers out in plain, hiding in plain sight. Pat Patterson was not public about his sexuality, but behind the scenes, people were definitely aware that Pat was queer. So when I started shooting in 2017, I was hard pressed to find a few people, and started with a regional wrestler named Scott McEwen. And then that led to stories about people like Charlie Morgan in the UK, Mike Perro coming out, and then Effie. And so cut to 2022 when we finished the film and we're releasing it. We've got nearly 800 out wrestlers around the globe, and we've got major promotions and events and people who are working top of the card. It fluctuates with companies like WWE. For a while they had a number of out wrestlers on the shows, and now they're and then for a while they had seemed to have cut everybody, and now they actually have another out wrestler on the roster right now, and they seem to be pushing that person. And then AEW has been very strong in terms of fighting for representation by offering people like Sunny Kiss and Nyla Rose the opportunity to, be who they are authentically.
Okay, so tell people about some of these wrestling leagues that you highlight.
Well, there's a bunch of different leagues. I mean, the major companies, obviously being the WWE, WWF, who are not necessarily the greatest at representation. But then on the other side of the coin, you've got companies like Hood Slam out of San Francisco, run by an amazing trans Persian woman, the Dark Sheik. And then you've also got promotions like Pride Championship Wrestling in San Antonio, Texas, that's been running since 2012. I mean, it's incredible to think that in kind of a more conservative state, there's been a queer wrestling organization that has continued to thrive and run. As the internet, has allowed people to market themselves, and with the advent of more of the wrestling streaming services like IWTV and Fight, we're getting a chance to see these smaller promotions, but we're also getting a chance to see promotions like GCW that have kind of filled a void on the circuit for independence and provide a platform for queer performers like Effie and Alley Catch, Dark Sheik among them. And, it's allowing, Edith Surreal. Amazing performers who represent all people across the queer spectrum of wrestling.
Okay. So quickly chronicle for me sort of some issues with queer representation in the WWE.
Well, I think that's that's going to be a long list because
Right.
the WWE has been notoriously bad at representation. Obviously, we can look at characters like Adrian Adonis, the incredibly flamboyant, heavily made up, effeminate character, boas and pink, and and a wrestler like Adrian Adonis, who had been known for kind of primarily being a tough guy, had been got pushed into this character in the 80s. In the 90s was when we really started to see some pretty dubious representations. Some of them obviously worked themselves out, like Gold Dust. Dustin Runnels, Dustin Rhodes, eventually would, take that character and kind of make it his own. But when it first started out, it was a very predatory character, a lot of, using somebody's fear of homosexuality or gender as a tool to create, villainry or heat. But then we've got characters like, then we've got storylines where you've got China being forced, who's already struggling with her own issues around being accused of being a transgender woman, and dealing with her own the idea of how they feminized her, and then pushing her into a trans storyline, or Billy and Chuck getting married on television and then going to that point and then making it a joke. So there's always been, by WWE, this use of homosexuality or queer representation in general as a tool to create heat and villainy. What's amazing is we've got current characters on the roster that they're queer baiting a lot of times, or they're creating these storylines that touch upon where maybe we're going to explore this kind of representation, and then they instantly claw it back. So the WWE has been notorious at kind of courting the community, whether that be hiring Jake Atlas after Stephanie had done an episode of Celebrity Undercover Boss, and then taking that character and then hiring him as the first active out male wrestler that they obviously they brought in. And then of course they'd had character people like Darren Young, who came out after they were on the roster. So it becomes pretty difficult to kind of play the to kind of to see where they stand in terms of representation, because they've made so many missteps, and it seems like every time they try to take a step forward, they end up just completely offending everybody, and then they almost just seem to recoil at the idea that they might be getting too progressive. And I don't know if that has to do with the fact that obviously we know that Vince McMahon is very good friends with former US President Trump, and that his wife was in the Trump administration for it was for and had run for the Republicans. I don't know if that's part of it, or if it's just a lack of empathy in general or understanding. As I said, certain members of the community have been part of it. Pat Patterson was there for 40 years. Was obviously Vince McMahon, one of Vince McMahon's most trusted advisors, and he was out, and he's Stephanie McMahon's godfather. So there's so much contradiction in that company. What's great now is that they're now being challenged on it, because other companies are grabbing a hold of that. The kind of taking the torch and doing a little more with allowing queer representation on their shows. AEW being the other billion-dollar wrestling company. But again, they're still making missteps, much the same way that they make missteps with people with xenophobia and race and sexism. So am I shocked? No, just WWE's just always kind of gone down that way, and they have the largest platform, and often are the ones who are the example of the worst kind of homophobia or queer fear.
Okay. And for these more queer-friendly leagues, has the WWE ever issued statements that are somewhat antagonistic about it, or have they been questioned about it?
I mean, they've been called out on things.
Right,
When Fred Rosser, Darren Young came out in WWE on that, he came out to TMZ in an airport.
right.
The WWE was very quick to try to differentiate Darren Young from Fred Rosser. So
Mm.
they sent out, I recall a statement where they sent it out saying, Fred Rosser, the man, is a homosexual. Darren Young, the wrestling character, is not.
Mhm.
And as one of our amazing wrestlers in the film, Reza Clark, says, the only person who gets to decide how you separate those things from who you are is the person themselves, not some corporate company, not some human, entity that's going to do that. It's your life, it's your story, and you get to choose how you want to be represented in Divide. And I think that's why we're seeing so many LGBTQIA plus performers working on these independents and working these companies, because they want the freedom to be who they are. And they're also finding out that in the case of somebody like an Effie, do they really need the WWE? Do they really need AEW? Because Effie's working 4 to 5 shows a week and making thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars a week in merch sales, and has created a brand and an entity all themselves. So that's been inspiring to a lot of people, somebody like an Effie. But then on the other hand, the importance of having people on TV like a Nyla Rose as a trans woman, or Sunny Kiss as a gender fluid trans feminine person. I mean, those representations are incredibly important because they've never been presented before. Even somebody like Anthony Bowens, the idea of an openly gay African American man with a partner on TV in one of the most popular tag teams is quite inspiring. Is there more work to be done? Absolutely. There's a lot more that needs to be done. And there's so many. That's why I have so many of these stories in Out in the Ring, is because the history of queer representation goes back to the 1940s, and people need to understand where they came from to where we've gotten to.
Okay. And so you said you learned about LGBTQ plus friendly wrestling leagues in 2015. How long was this production when you started, like pre-production?
Well, I guess, the idea started swimming around in my head around 2015. I
Okay.
started shooting in the summer of 2017.
Oh,
And so it was a 4.5 year process of shooting. Also, we were obviously had a year where the pandemic had happened.
right.
But there was also it was also an issue in pro wrestling with the speaking out movement, which is essentially the Me Too movement for wrestling, where a lot of wrestlers, including one of the queer promoters running one of the organizations, who was was initially to be a centerpiece of this film, and we had to cut them out of the film. Uh, and it worked out that during the pandemic, I was able to do a remote interview via Zoom with a camera crew in San Francisco with the Dark Sheik, and she was amazing. And she, of course, had founded Hood Slam. But then, just as we had locked picture the first time before the pandemic, the founder of PCW, Iggy Mendoza, had reached out to me and said, "Oh, I wish we could." So we ended up working. We had the issue with the speaking out movement, where one of our LGBTQIA plus promotions and promoters had been accused of sexual misconduct. But at the same time, we had to cut that out of the film. Iggy Mendoza, the founder of Pride Championship Wrestling in San Antonio, had reached out to me saying how they would like to be involved in the film, and that they wish that we had known about them. And I had not known about Iggy's promotion. Because it wasn't a lot of news on this small regional promotion, queer promotion. Uh, as it and what ended up working out is that I was able to then replace the other promotion with Iggy's promotion, which offered me a whole new world of performers who had never left the state of Texas to work. And now that promotion is other people are coming in to work for those promotions. And it's great because it's allowing some of the performers that don't necessarily have the platform to work on some, say, even a GCW show, just because of the cost of travel and transportation. And so they're finding spots on these other promotions as well. It's really quite exciting to see these promotions pop up and see these out promoters making space. And then you've got people like Billy Dixon, who are integral to promoting queer programming and events. But of course, as Billy has stated many times, hey Vince, hey Tony, when are you gonna? You could just do a whole show based on booking out performers without even mentioning that they're out. You could do that, and there has the hope is in a perfect world that nobody would care. And the truth is most wrestling fans don't care. They like Effie. They enjoy seeing it. We see Pollo Del Mar managing on NWA, one of the most southern conservative, bastions of professional wrestling for over the last 60 years. And now we have an out queer drag queen managing a southern hillbilly presented wrestler as the girlfriend of that said wrestler. You've got Max the Impaler, a trans man, non-binary trans man, trans mask man, coming in and working, for the NWA as well. Jamie Senegal wrestling as the first trans woman to ever work for NWA. And that's also a lot of thanks to some of these amazing allies. I mean, people like Mickey James and Lita, Amy Dumas, and even people like Medusa and Lisa Marie Varon, who was Victoria and in WWE, they have become allies to these performers and they're allowing the opportunity. And it's often the case that women are the first to reach out to the LGBTQIA plus community just because they get it. They've fought so hard to find their place on the card. Now they're willing to help these queer performers find their places on it. And the hope is that this continues and they can continue to break through some of these glass ceilings that other performers before them have, and it hopefully continues to grow.
All right, beautiful. Are you excited to be included in Fantasia Fest this year?
So I have known Mitch Davis for 25 years, who is the director of programming of Fantasia. Yeah. I can tell you where we met. We met at a TIFF screening of a Japanese gore fest called Kichiku. Mitch and I instantly became friends. I went to the very first Fantasia that they programmed, and to cut to 25 years later, here I am screening out in the ring to an audience different. I mean, the world premiere we had was in Toronto at the LGBTQIA plus film festival, Inside Out, and we won Best Canadian Feature there. But we knew we were going into a pretty safe space.
Right.
What's exciting about Fantasia is it's more my personal audience. I grew up on genre film. Mm-hmm. I grew up as, a wrestling fan, a comic book kid, cult stuff. And it's exciting to be alongside friends of mine. Kayla Janice has been one of my closest friends for 20 years.
Oh, wow.
Kayla marched, Kayla.
I just read her book.
Kayla's incredible, and her books are amazing, and everything she does is amazing. Her doc, Woodland Stark and Days.
Yeah, that's great.
Woodland Stark is so good,
yeah.
and Kayla marched in the Pride Parade for one of our movies in Toronto with me, so we go back a long way. So the idea that I get to share space with people like Kayla Janice and that films from friends like Rod Gudino are playing there. And being able to, bring it home in a way. And in a lot of ways, while I live in Toronto, the Fantasia audience is probably more home.
Okay.
Because I've spent more time in that space in terms of the community. I've always been, the genre film nerd, and wrestling and genre film and comic book culture and convention culture all go together, and they all tend to kind of mix in this stew, because if you go to a convention, chances are you're going to see wrestlers, you're going to see horror icons, you're going to see TV icons, and you're going to see comic book writers.
Mm-hmm.
So they all cross over in this kind of wonderful stew and diversity of fandom.
Are you a little nervous for the screening?
I think I was more nervous the first time I saw the film presented on the big screen, and mostly because I'm always in my head thinking, oh, great, if the projector stops, I'm screwed. Or if the subtitle or the closed captioning doesn't work on the film.
Yeah.
Or the color, there's a blip in the DCP.
Mm-hmm.
I'm excited more by this screening because of the people that I care about being there, but also because we've got this huge contingent of wrestlers coming in. Mike Perro's coming, Sonny Kiss is coming, Danny Jordan's coming, and then we've got two of the local experts, Pat LaPrade and Bertrand Hébert, who are integral to sharing some of these queer stories and their involvement in the history of wrestling, specifically Bertrand Hébert, who was Pat Patterson's biographer, and we're basically in Pat Patterson's backyard. I wish we could have interviewed Pat, but Pat's health was declining, his memory was going, and it would just not have been fair to put him on a camera and ask him to try and remember everything. So Bertrand is, by default, the perfect proxy because he spent all those years with Pat and it is so close. And the same with Pat Laprade. They're amazing people, and we're really lucky that we've got this great guest contingent coming in for Fantasia.
Ryan, thanks for your time. I really appreciated it. And I urge people to check out Out of the Ring. What do you want people to feel after they've seen it?
I just want people who aren't necessarily wrestling fans to appreciate what these people do, appreciate the risks they took in coming out of the closet, the risks they continue to take by performing within pro wrestling, and that people find a newfound respect for not only these people as as in-ring performers and sports entertainers, but also the bravery it takes to live one's truth especially in the current political climate right now.
Okay, well, lots of luck to you and all the best.
Thank you so much.